Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet and around the world on satellite radio via the Liberty Radio Network. I have a great guest coming on, Roslyn Ross. I met her at a recent conference in Vancouver called Capitalism and Morality. She's the author of a book called A Theory of Objectivist Parenting. And actually, before we get into this, I'm going to play a video that she has about a very interesting take on how to treat children and how it feels to be treated that way. So I'm going to play that video and then we'll come right back.
Roslyn, thank you for coming over.
Yeah.
You look so big. You are so big. Wow.
Well, it's good to see you too. It's been so long.
You put your napkin down all by yourself. Good girl.
Anyway, so I was going to tell you about...
What do we say?
May I have some tea?
What's the magic word?
Please.
Yes.
Yes. Anyway, so...
Oh, don't forget to share.
Of course not.
Good girl.
So I wanted to tell you a couple stories. One was about my sister. I think she's a bad person. I don't think I like her anymore. Weird.
No.
She's a real, yeah.
You like her.
She just turned into a...
No. You like her. She's a good girl, and you're a good girl. You like her.
Maybe that's not the right conversation to have with you. We'll talk about this woman from work.
Okay.
She's been really picking on me a lot, and I don't understand why or what I did, but it's really hard every day when I go into work now. I don't even understand why she's so mean to me. She just says these things.
There. All better. You feel better now. Just, there you go. There you go, all better. Are you hot? You look hot. You look hot. Let's put a jacket on you. Okay? Give me your arm. Okay, now push it through. Push it through. Good. Good. Now this arm. Here we go. Push it through. Can you push it through?
I'm really not cold.
Oh yeah, you were cold. You looked cold. There you go. All better.
I think I'm gonna go. You're a really sweet guy. I think I'm gonna go.
You want to go? Okay. All right. Well, can you say goodbye? Can you say goodbye like this? Like, blow me a kiss on your way out? Like this. You go like, here. Take your hand and you blow me a kiss. Goodbye. You go like this, like this. Goodbye. Goodbye. Okay. I do it. Now you do it.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
So as you could see, really a funny, cute video, but also gets a point across about how to treat children. And we're going to ask her a lot about that because she has a lot of theories on that. But before we get into all that, Roslyn, I have to ask you, how did you become an anarchist?
Okay, so short answer, I read Atlas Shrugged. Long answer, I think I was born that way, kind of. And then I guess the main long answer is after I read Atlas Shrugged, I gave it to a lot of people. I think I personally bought about 30 copies, and they either didn't read it or read 100 pages and said it was boring, or read 100 pages and said, wow, that Lillian Reardon character is so amazing, I really connect with her. Love is totally a bandage for dirty sores, what a beautiful idea. And one day I finally gave it to a new friend that I had made named Tom Garrett, and he read it, and he had studied politics and economics at UCLA, and for him, it was just bam, because in college he had only ever studied basically socialism. And when he read that book, it was just this whole world opened up to him. So it was, Friedman and Rothbard. And for me, I had gone the psychological route. But so he became an anarchist like almost immediately after reading Atlas Shrugged and finding better information than he had been provided with at UCLA. And I became one a little slower while studying psychology because after studying enough psychology, I concluded that there is no such thing as a healthy relationship between a government and a citizen. Governments can't be healthy relationships, basically. So if you want a society that's healthy, with healthy people that respect themselves and take responsibility for their lives, they can't be in a relationship with this hypothetical thing called a government. A lot of people have read the book Nonviolent Communication. It's pretty big, but they don't make the connection between nonviolent communication and government. You can't love nonviolent communication and respect and then support government. And it's the same thing with objectivism and epistemology. Ayn Rand has this great thing that she says in Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology about abstracting out of context. And my other conclusion about government is that it's kind of like abstracting out of context. When governments make rules, and life is dynamic. Rules, it's very hard to make a blanket statement rule like aggressing against people is bad under all circumstances at all times. It doesn't work. It's because there's always these, well, unless they're about to drown, or unless they're aggressing against you. So government, to me, it's kind of abstracting out of context. It's not a good idea.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely not a good idea. Let's get into the parenting sort of stuff. So you wrote the book, A Theory of Objectivist Parenting, and a lot of the people I've had on in the past talk a lot about peaceful parenting, and this is a slightly different theory. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
So A Theory of Objectivist Parenting started because, Ayn Rand told me, if you want to be a mom one day, if you want to be a mom, you better study it and make it a career, approach it the way you would a career. So I started really studying it and learning about it. And after college, I became a nanny and to practice with other people's kids. And I loved objectivism, and so I would always picture what would parenting be like at Galt's Gulch? How would we raise our children at Galt's Gulch? And I read some books on child development, and I concluded that parenting at Galt's Gulch would be very similar to the tiger mom. It would be really intense, and those kids would all be perfectly well behaved, and we'd all be really consistent all the time. And that ended up being very contradictory to objectivism, and I ended up deciding that you can't. Objectivism is about treating other people with respect and freedom, relating to people with respect. And it's very contradictory to say, I'm going to relate to people with respect after they're 18, or after they're 16, or, it's, where does that person suddenly become a person worthy of respect? And I decided birth. And so I've been treating my son with, kind of absolute respect since birth, and I really think that there are a lot of parenting is about control. It's how to control this other person, and there's a lot of people that are well, don't control them with violence, don't control them with hitting. I'm don't control them at all. That's complete hitting. What about manipulation? And I was a nanny for 10 years. I never hit a child, but I made them do everything I wanted them to do. I turned them into fake little trophy people. So you don't need to. I'm sorry, I don't know that much about peaceful parenting, except they're extremely against hitting.
Yeah, that's about all I know about it, too. But I agree with it. I would never hit a kid. I've never hit my kids. And I don't know if I do parenting the way that you talk about in your book, but to me, it's all, I actually treat my kids very much like sort of the opposite of your video there. I treat them like little adults. And, they have their responsibilities. I don't tell them what to do, but, I also will reward them, and not to say a reward, but, for example, if I want something from upstairs and I'm too busy to get it, or I'm too lazy to get it, I'll talk to my daughter and I'll say, how much would you charge me to go get my phone from upstairs? And she'll be like, oh, $1. And I'll be like, okay, deal. And so it's a deal. And because of that, they become very... everything's a negotiation. Everything is rational. Everything is, nonviolent. There's definitely never a hint of any sort of violence ever going to happen. And because of that, my kids have a relationship with me that I think is excellent, in that they really trust me. Because, for example, there was one time my daughter, who was about 6 at the time, was on this really high ledge, about at least 10 feet up. And she said she was going to jump off. And, a lot of parents might go, get angry at them or even hit them for doing it or yell at them and say, if you do that, I'll do this. But I just said to her, I said, well, that's pretty high up. That's about 3 times your height. My advice is not to jump off of that. You could hurt yourself. And she said, really, Papa? And I said, well, you can try it if you want, but I wouldn't do it. And I said, why don't you try it from lower first and see how it feels? And she did that. And then by the time she worked herself up to about 6 feet, she was like, yeah, this is too much for today. So I have that sort of a relationship with my kids.
That sounds very similar to a conversation I would have with Anders. I remember when he was like 18 months old, we were in the north in the wintertime, and there were all these people with wood stoves. And when it came to the kids around the wood stoves, the parents would be like, no, danger, get away. And I would let Anders I would take him over there and I would say, feel, it's going to be hot. It's going to be hot if you go closer. He's 18 months. He doesn't even really talk yet. And he totally got it. And he was 100% safe around the wood stoves. And there was this 3-year-old there who was not. She was extremely dangerous around the wood stoves because she was never allowed to touch them when the wood stove was cold. My son would go over and explore it. But he could tell. And I knew he could tell. Like, it was obvious. He knew when it was cold and when it was hot. But the 3-year-old who was being lied to, her parents would tell her that it was hot, even when it wasn't hot. You could tell that she was already developing not a trusting relationship with the adults. And that's why she was dangerous around the wood stove when it was hot, because they were liars. They weren't worth trusting. So with Anders, I have always tried to be completely honest about everything regarding his safety and everything else. And so there's a great deal of trust in our relationship, which I really like.
Yeah, why don't you give us some examples from your own personal life of how you have a 4-year-old son. Give us some personal examples of how you treated him as a baby, as opposed to the way that perhaps other people treat babies.
Well, so for example, one of my favorite examples is when babies are crying and parents don't know what to do, and whether you can. A lot of parents are all about distraction. So the baby cries and they bounce it and then they shake it and then they swaddle it and then they hold it really tight and put something shiny in its face. And I never distracted Anders away from his negative emotions. I'm very into allowing him to feel his negative emotions and be comfortable with them. We have negative emotions. It's part of life. Feeling pain is okay, is the message that I give him. I'm here for you when you're feeling pain. I may not be able to fix it for you, and I'm not going to numb you out from it or distract you away from it. I'm just going to be here with you while you're experiencing it. I do notice that the distracting, I think I read by 6 months, most kids have learned to repress their emotions. They've learned that their parents don't like it when they cry. So they'll suck their thumbs, or they will try to distract themselves. And that's kind of what adults do when we feel something uncomfortable. We're like, ooh, ice cream, ooh, a movie, or ooh, a cocktail will fix it. And I think it's really not helpful for adults to do that. And I don't think it's helpful for children. I think it's learned by the age of 6 months. So one thing that I've worked on with Anders a lot is just being comfortable with discomfort.
That's interesting. Yeah, I do it myself. When I'm not happy with the situation, I'll have a few drinks. So maybe it all came from my repression of my feelings when I was younger. Who knows? It's all very interesting. So for people interested, we'll have the link to it down below, A Theory of Objectivist Parenting. It's available on Amazon. Definitely interesting approach, especially if you're into objectivism. And let's talk a little bit about that, because you're an anarchist, and you mentioned to me earlier, you even think Ayn Rand was an anarchist. What's your take on objectivism and on Ayn Rand as it relates to anarchism?
Well, I think that she would have reached anarchy. You notice that one thing I find really interesting about Ayn Rand is that she wrote fiction, right? And she's developing her ideas. She's trying to figure it out. She's trying to express something that she notices in the world that she wants to say. And her fiction gets better and better and better as she gets clearer and clearer about what it is she wants to say. She finally writes Atlas Shrugged, and then she writes nonfiction, because she finally knew what she wanted to say, and she figured out a way to say it, and she figured out a language to use to communicate her ideas. And one of her last works, Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, and I wish she had stayed around to write more than that. But in that book, she talks about epistemology, and she talks about abstracting and perceiving the world, and how abstractions are hard to work with. And it's important when you are abstracting to always be clear, because abstractions taken out of context are very unclear, and can create a lot of problems in a relationship. So it's kind of like the giant abstractions that we try to make, like telling the truth is good. These are this idea of truth, this idea of good. These are huge abstractions, and if you use it in a certain context, like your friend tells you a story, and you're like, telling the truth would be good in this circumstance, then we both understand each other. But if you are a philosopher and you sit there and you're like, telling the truth is good, then everyone can argue with you, because that's a blanket abstraction made about nothing specific. And well, what if somebody's going to shoot you if you tell the truth? Is it good then? So I do think that she would have reached the same conclusion that I have reached, which is that government is kind of an abstraction. It's a huge abstraction. That's what laws are. And we go to great lengths to make them specific for every circumstance ever that it could ever apply to. And that's when a law is first made, unless you're going to get that specific, it's kind of like abstracting out of context. You can't make a rule that isn't an abstraction out of a context, which kind of leads you to a more fluid kind of government, which would be anarchy, like a more able to move, nimble on its feet, a more in touch with real life and real people and real relationships. And that's kind of where I'm at right now with that. But I have years left of research to do into some neuroscience and other views of epistemology and some sociology before I really am conclusive.
Very interesting. And for people watching, you can see behind you there, not a lot of furniture in your house. And I know you mentioned you are a minimalist, but the reason that you don't have a lot of furniture is because you're just packing up right now in Los Angeles. You're moving in a little over a week to Nicaragua. Why don't you let people know why you're moving and why Nicaragua?
Well, my husband and I have been talking about moving to Nicaragua for a long time. So wait, hold on. Why Nicaragua? I'm going to get back to that. Because first I want to say, I want to talk about what I was talking about before with kids and drugs, which I find very interesting. Humans can use any substance as a spice, a self-medication, or a drug. So for some people, they use shopping as something to spice up their life, or a self-medication or a drug. And for me, it's chocolate and wine. Those are my self-medications. A self-medication is when you're trying to change your mood. So having a glass of wine before you go into the party, that's self-medicating. Spicing up your life is the glass of wine is oh, it would just be fun right now. And then, because you don't have a goal outside of this would just be fun to do this. You're not trying to change something about yourself. And then drugs that's numbing. So eating chocolate just compulsively till the point that you just don't feel anything. And my husband and I were talking about this.
You can eat that much chocolate?
No, I don't.
Reach a point where you don't feel it?
No. Oh, you can. No. You can definitely eat or drink yourself to numbness, or shop or work or sex yourself to numbness. There's a million ways. Humans love drugs. We love numbing. And we love self-medicating. It's our attempt to control ourselves and our behavior and how we feel, because, we don't like uncomfortable emotions. And so my husband and I were talking about this, and he realizes that he drugs out with TV. That's his drug of choice. He goes to work and he comes home exhausted, and he just numbs out, non-existence into the world of a TV show. And so we were talking about this, and he decided that he didn't want to do it anymore. We both gave up all of our drugs. Last year, we were life is short, we should do more drugs. We were watching a lot of Doug Stanhope. And so 2014, our New Year's resolution was to do more drugs. And we kind of,
that's an interesting New Year's resolution, quite opposite for most people.
We're very healthy you want to be healthy, so you live a long, healthy life, but you also want to party it up a little bit because you're going to die anyway. you know? It doesn't matter how healthy you are, you're going to die. So last year we did that. It didn't really work out. It didn't really make us happier or enrich our lives. And so this year we're like talking about drugs, and he's like, that's it, I'm not doing any more drugs. And I made that rule for myself too. Like I can buy all the chocolate I want and all the nice red wine I want, as long as I'm not using it as a self-medication. It can only be a spice. So he's allowed to watch all the TV he wants, but it has to be a spice for his life. It can't be to change his mood, and it can't be to drug out. And he instead comes home from work and just like stares at the wall, and he's just like, pain. And after about a week of that, he would come home from work and just start working in the yard, and we were like the cutest family you've ever seen, just doing yard work after work. And then about a week after that, he was like, all right, let's move to Nicaragua. This sucks. And it was fascinating, because that was my whole theory, was that drugs enable us to live lives we couldn't otherwise live. Without your drugs, you feel pain, and the pain propels you to change your life. If you take away the drugs, you're forced to make other choices. So that was a really fun example of how that worked out. So he says, let's move to Nicaragua and live on a farm, and grow all of our own food. And I mean, we've been developing the Nicaragua property for years, and it's really peaceful there. It's kind of like being on summer vacation for a grown-up. It's kind of ridiculous, like the calmness. Every time I go there at first, I'm like freaking out. I'm like, everyone go faster. And then I chill out, and then I get to LA, and I'm like, the stress here, it makes me want to throw up. Like it's just in the air, and because you just get chill, and I love that. I love the fresh air. So, why Nicaragua? A lot of people want to know why Nicaragua instead of Chile, or instead of Alaska. And
are those the only other options?
No, we looked everywhere. I'm much more of a Europe kind of girl than a tropics kind of girl. My husband is like a way tropics kind of guy. We went to Hawaii a lot of times before we had Anders, and I do not like I don't like the tropics very much. I'm much more of a snow. We're gonna, to make me happy this year, we're gonna go skiing in Whistler or snowboarding. I like mountains and snow. But he loves the tropics, and he loves surfing, and he ended up getting really interested in, he was interested in freedom for a long time, and we looked all over the world, and Nicaragua has kind of an unbeatable price point. Just the quality of life that you can have there now, because everything in Nicaragua is so inexpensive. I mean, you can buy an acre of land for $500, and that's if you're buying 1 acre of land. If you're going to buy 400, that you can get it for like $100 an acre. And this is some of the most fertile land in the world in terms of just the nutrient quality of your food, because nutrients in the United States, like our soil is so depleted that, our apples have 50% of the nutrients that they did 100 years ago. I'm sure I'm off on those numbers, but the general idea is correct. And we liked and how close it is. We liked Chile. Chile's beautiful. But it's too far. The flight to Nicaragua is 5 hours. It's like flying to New York. So, sorry, I'm getting a lot of text messages right now.
Popular.
So better flight. If you want to be able to come back to the U.S., like we don't want to leave the U.S. forever. We're not trying to. Well, who knows? We're kind of open to the experience, but. Going 5 hours back is nice, and 3 hours to Florida, 3 hours to Texas. That's, if I need to do some shopping that I can't do in Nicaragua, it's a 3-hour flight. It's not like that in Chile, and Chile is extremely expensive. So, in Nicaragua, you can build a very nice, luxurious house for probably $30,000, and you could build a third world poverty hut for $2,000. So that makes life nicer. It's nice to retire young.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Nicaragua. I've said that a lot. It's probably the nicest, cheapest place in the Americas. It's interesting because Nicaragua, of course, went through quite a civil war and all kinds of chaos and stuff like that. And one of the interesting things about countries that have gone through those things is afterwards they're usually really nice. And I found that with Nicaragua is people are like, okay, we don't want any more of that war stuff. Let's just take it easy.
Yeah. Yes.
And you mentioned the price point, and you brought up Chile as well. Chile is, 10, 15 years ago, Chile was really cheap. But it's grown so much that it's, if you live in Santiago now, it's not much different than being in the U.S. And Nicaragua still hasn't gone anywhere near that. So for people looking in the Americas, Nicaragua might be one to look at.
Yeah, it is like that. They had war, and they're very, very peaceful. There's no violent crime where we live whatsoever. And they talk about violent crime that they see on the news that happens in other places, and they're like, oh, God. And they're too poor for guns. There's no guns, as far as we know, in our area. It's like how, if you had a gun, you'd probably sell it and buy something cooler with it. So that's been very nice. And they also love capitalism, which I love. They're more capitalistic than Americans because they have socialism, so they think capitalism is the best.
Yeah, socialism is a really good cure for becoming a capitalist, because once you go through that, as people in Venezuela are finding out right now, it just doesn't work. And once you get through that, and that might be an opportunity too in Venezuela, once they finally get through this last thing with socialism, hopefully, that could be the next place to go as well. And Venezuela is very beautiful. Of course, right now it's not a good place to go. We actually have a Dollar Vigilante group in Venezuela, and they're always talking about how it's getting worse and worse every day. But Nicaragua's already gone through all that. And so, yeah, I definitely think that's a up-and-coming place for people looking to get out of the U.S.
Yeah, and soon-ish, too, I think, maybe, because I'm not sure what the effect of I don't really know what's going on with that at the moment, but there was supposed to be a ton of money coming into Nicaragua for the canal from China. So that God, I hope Nicaragua doesn't become Chile. I like the prices.
Yeah, I don't know what the status of that is. I heard about that a few years ago, that China wanted to create its own sort of Panama Canal through Nicaragua. Do you know where that's at? Because I haven't heard anything about it recently.
Yeah, it's down in the south. I've been to the site, but what we heard is that Nicaragua will accept the money and pour it into their economy. They've already I want to say 15 billion, but don't quote me on the numbers. Poured into this project that's been going on, and then there's going to be all these environmental protests, and they'll eventually decide not to build the canal, but they will have gotten a ton of money poured into their economy for the project that's not going to work out. That's what I've heard.
That's interesting. Yeah, a lot of the hot money coming out of China goes to a lot of places, and even in Cambodia, I've got friends there, and they built up all these apartments and all these big buildings and casinos and everything, and the economy really wasn't ready for it yet, and now most of them are sitting pretty empty, but it did bring in a lot of money into the local economy for a period.
Yeah, you have to be in reality, be where you are. I mean, that's our whole thing in what we're building too. It's like we're just building our summer house with, a lot of extra rooms in case people want to come stay, or like bungalows. It's kind of hacienda style.
That's great.
Just doing it slowly.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So, do you have anything else you want to finish up on? If not, let people know where they can get your book, and if you have a blog or anything like that.
I do. I have a blog, roslynross.blogspot.com, and it's not really my focus, but I have some really interesting posts on there, like whatever I'm thinking about currently. Every now and then I'll post something. It's kind of where I keep notes for my next book. My next book is going to be on raising children in reality, which could be an interesting subject of conversation. I think it's one of the major mistakes that freedom-loving parents make. They raise respectful children, but they don't raise them in touch with reality, so they end up way better off than the kids who went to school, but kind of on the same timeline, where they reach adulthood at 16 to 18 and go to college at 16 or 18 and kind of rejoin society, rather than kids who are raised in reality in the history of the human race being much more adult-like when they're 8 to 12. When Harvard was founded, the average age of the entering freshman was 12 to 15. That's when you were a grown-up. And it's very interesting how long we've prolonged childhood. And I think that the Victorians encouraging children to move into a fantasy world and be out of touch with reality has a lot to do with it. And so that's what my next book is going to be about. So I post a lot of stuff on just my notes for that.
So when you say raise them in reality, does that mean no Santa Claus, no tooth fairy, that sort of thing?
Well, yeah. I mean, lying. Okay, so those are major lies, lying to your innocent, naive child is not part of a healthy relationship, I think, because, like Maria Montessori says, the adult imagines, the child merely believes, and to establish a dishonest relationship with your children in that way is kind of not the smartest thing to do if you're trying to have a respectful relationship with them. But it's not just that. It's all the fantasy we feed them. Like, the Victorians tried to remove children from the world, right? Well, big religion had been trying to remove children from the world for hundreds of years. And it made children very unhappy to be kept at home and not allowed to go out into the world, not allowed to work, not allowed to do something meaningful with their lives and their time and join the larger society. Children were told, like, no, you belong over here in this box, in this school box where you will be, or this home box where you will be protected from the big bad world, because big religion thought that if children were kept away from drinking, fornicating, and gambling, they would never grow up to know that those things existed, so they wouldn't do those things. But what ended up happening is that children just got really frustrated and angry and like really kind of became kind of these annoying little creatures who needed to be entertained because they couldn't take part in the larger world. They couldn't be part of life. And that's one thing that I notice about the Sudbury schools that I love, and it's the same problem. We're still taking children out of the world and sticking them in a little box and saying, you can enter the world when you're grown up. This is the world for children. I don't want you to hang out with grown-ups and learn how to be a grown-up. I want you to hang out with like 4-year-olds and 9-year-olds and focus on fairies and dragons and princesses. I think, like Maria Montessori argued, that children who are invited into reality with their parents aren't interested in fairies and dragons and princesses, and that has actually been, and Anders is only 4, so we'll see, but that's been my experience with him so far, is that he's very interested in, he sees his dad goes to work. That's what he wants to do. He wants to figure out how to get there, because that's what being a grown-up is. He's not like obsessed with Harry Potter. And I find that with my generation, it's like we're the most disappointed generation because we're all still waiting for our letters from Hogwarts to come, and we all thought life would be more, magical than this. And there's all these girls that were expecting to be princesses who found out that they're not actually going to be a princess. And I think that I call it the Waldorfication of childhood. So I think that that's the next thing that I want to write a book about for liberty-minded parents, is that I would like to convince them to not just respect their children and not beat them, but to invite them into, like, bring your kid to life with you.
Yeah, that's interesting because I have 2 kids, 9 and 10 years old, and I've always found it very uncomfortable when they bring up Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy. And one of the things I did with my son just last Christmas is he wanted a pretty big thing for Christmas. I believe we got him a computer. And so it was written that it was from Santa Claus, and my wife's into that kind of stuff. Mexican culture really likes a lot of that kind of stuff. And so my son said to me on Christmas, he said, Papa, Santa got me a computer and you didn't get me anything. How come? And I said, well, I kind of work with Santa. Santa doesn't have a lot of money. And so he couldn't afford the computer. So me and Santa together, we got that computer for you. And then just the other day, my daughter, who's 9, one of her teeth fell out. And down here in Mexico, they have a funny thing. They don't have the tooth fairy. They have the tooth mouse or the tooth rat. And it's supposed to come around and leave you money. And it was funny because my daughter, she's very savvy. And I always treat her sort of how it sounds like you talk about in your book. I treat them as adults. And I never talk down to them or, fairy tales and all that kind of stuff. And but she came up to me and she said, Papa, The tooth rat's going to come tonight. Should I not lock the door to my bedroom because then the tooth rat might not be able to get in? And I think she was hinting that she knows it's us, and she just wanted to make sure we could get in to leave her 100 pesos, which is about $7. She actually wanted 300 pesos, so she's a bit of a capitalist as well. But yeah, it's interesting, different ways of treating children.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we've got your book. We're going to have links to that down below. And you're moving to Nicaragua. I hope the move goes well. And hopefully we'll talk to you sometime after you've been down there for a while and see how it's going.
Yeah, and you'll see a very different background.
Yeah, for sure.
I'll hopefully have a background as gorgeous as yours. That's what I want.
Yeah, sounds good. So have a good trip. And so that's been it for Anarchast. If you like this, just subscribe, like down below, share these videos. That's how we can get this information out there. A lot of this information on how to treat children, I think, is really important, from peaceful parenting to objectivist parenting, just different ways, and to help them become the best that they can be through treating them with peace and with reality. And so that's it for Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Peace, love, and anarchy.
When you consider that you have to spend all your time basically unteaching what your kids just learned.
So not only must the government recognize natural rights, but the government can't disparage them. Unfortunately, the people in the government have a hole in their copy where the Second Amendment is, the Ninth Amendment, and the 10th Amendment.
So, this is not so saintly. I mean, because he's got the reputation of favoring, ending slavery. But he wasn't an opponent of slavery. The abolitionists were opponent of slavery, but not Abe Lincoln.
I mean, the actual argument and the explanation is pretty darn simple. I mean, it's so simple as to almost be self-evident. I mean, things like self-ownership and the non-aggression principle, it takes about 3 seconds to demonstrate that government can't be legitimate.
Well, I think human beings have the right to shape their own reality. And that's what's been taken away from us. We are participating involuntarily in a system that shapes our reality for us. And the first step is to not allow that.
You're paying off your debt, you have to pay off your car loans, your mortgage, you have to maybe even live with your parents, and then you look back at your life and you did nothing. You never challenged yourself, you never experienced anything, you never lived your life because you kept doing what the machine told you to do.
From Acapulco, Mexico, this is Anarchast.